I'm Michael, and welcome to Beyond The Screenplay's What We're Watching, our podcast where we watch a limited television series week by week. Today we're talking about White Lotus, Season 3, Episode 3, titled The Meaning of Dreams, available on HBO Max. I'm joined by the Beyond The Screenplay team, Trisha Rand.
Hello, everyone.
Brian Bittner.
Hello.
And Alex Calleros.
Hi.
Okay, so we're in Episode 3 here. We are continuing our new What We're Watching season, where we're comparing this season a little bit to the previous seasons, and also Trisha is kind enough to come into the season cold and be offering that perspective, which I really value and I think is a good lens to watch something that purports itself as a, anthology series and seems to want to be watched that way. I'm appreciating that, and that's a lot of fun. And I'm interested to talk about this episode because some of the fears that we kind of put forth in our first episode, where we reviewed the first two episodes, were it's an extra episode longer this season as opposed to the other ones. Is there going to be content enough to fill all the episodes? Why add another? And this episode, not a lot happened, and it's a little bit of a ding on the density scale of what's happening here. I enjoyed the episode fine. I feel like it was pleasant and all the normal things that are nice about a White Lotus thing. It shot well. There is like progression and character arcs and stuff like that, but it does feel just like just one move forward happened kind of for everybody. And so, the episode's about the meaning of dreams. It opens on this dream that Victoria, the mom, has that was incepted into her by the child watching too many tsunami dreams. So that was kind of funny. There's the dynamic between, the three friends kind of takes an interesting turn where we see kind of for the first time those two ganging up, quote unquote, on the other one, and it's for political reasons. And so we're sort of like teasing out that tension, and that felt well observed and well done. And then there's kind of an extended snake sequence that is that is interesting. And again, what's his character's name? Rick. Like, I want to know what Rick's deal is. The show is doing a good job of like, that question is right there. There's clearly something deep. He's had these kind of couple of therapy sessions where he hints at this sort of kind of tortured backstory and maybe thinks he's not a good person. I don't know. So there's enough intrigue that I want to know what's going on, but I don't know enough to be like, I totally get why he just released all these snakes. He sort of talks about like they shouldn't be caged. Anyway, it was just interesting the things that this episode spent time on and other things that it didn't. So overall, I'm enjoying it, but was feeling like a little bit of this could have moved faster. So that was my take. I don't know. Alex, what are your thoughts?
It's interesting because I didn't feel like it moved any slower than the first two episodes, but I think there was something about this episode that felt like we're finally hitting kind of a pivot point for several characters. So we have the dad, Timothy, finally hitting this just kind of he's almost like shutting down now because he cannot face the tsunami that is coming his way with whatever criminal activity he's wrapped up in, that the FBI is closing in on him. His son's now getting calls from the office, and so he's like unable to escape this thing closing in around him, and so he finally gives up the devices and kind of forces it on the whole family because his son is also a recipient of the calls that he wants to avoid. And I feel like this episode also had that turn with the friends. And I think there's something that feels like an escalation with the political revelation. And I love that the show is going there because it's kind of exploring all these kind of catty, just like ick things with this like slightly toxic friend group are, it's kind of gross that they're saying this about each other, but it's not like insurmountable. But it feels like this political identity thing may be more insurmountable and more of a problem than anything else that's been raised so far. And I love that the show it's just, it's not afraid to go to what is happening in our world in this moment and the things that do break up families and friendships, and when our politics is this charged. And so I did feel like, even though the show, yes, was that frustrating thing of like, we moved everybody forward an inch, every week is just an inch, at least this inch felt a bit more like, okay, things are like gonna start breaking down real soon, because now the cracks are really showing, and we've kind of bumped up against some truths that are now becoming inescapable. So I'm excited for the next episode in a way that the first two I wasn't like feeling the momentum, and now I do feel like some momentum is building, at least, to have things start crashing together.
Yeah, and I feel like there's maybe a Chekhov's snake that is now been established and might slither back.
Yeah,
at some point.
the snake sequence was strange, and it did feel like a little bit put upon, just like it's like, yeah, the snakes are caged and I'm caged and I'm dangerous and I want to be free, or something. And Chelsea getting bitten, lots of symbolism going on there.
Yeah. Trisha, what about you?
Yeah, agree with what you guys have said generally. This one felt like it was spinning its wheels a little bit to me. Part of it, I think, is that the overall pacing in the scenes themselves is slow, right? Like, a lot of these scenes are staged with people sitting and talking and like awkward silences, and they're just kind of looking at each other, or eating their breakfast. They were eating breakfast for half this episode, I swear to God. And like, yeah, there's just a lot of air in the scenes. Now, that's not necessarily a critique, because it feels really deliberate. And I will say that the glacial pace of the conversation scenes, to me, gave me like bad feelings in a way that is probably very intended. Right? This whole episode gave me bad feelings. I was like, hey, ooh. I think you guys mentioned last episode that the show kind of has a tradition of like social horror, and that is how this felt to me. So I think that what it's doing on purpose, but doesn't necessarily make it more fun to watch in the moment, where it really feels like not a lot is happening. And there were a few things too that feel like some false starts, or like tension is building and now it's gone, where I was like, oh snap, Chelsea got bit by a snake. She's got to go to the hospital. Like, she's going to be hospitalized for a while. Maybe she's not going to make it there quite on time. So she's going to be really sick for a while.
Cut to.
Or like it's going to really affect her relationship, because she's really starting to worry that he's totally unhinged and she's considering leaving him now. Like, I was like, all right, some stuff. Nope. Just none of that at all. And that's always really perplexing. When they kind of pull back from having like moved a piece forward, and then it's like, no, never mind. Now again, I have no idea where it's going, so it's perfectly possible, to your point, Michael, that these snakes will be back, at least as a metaphor, if not literally, because we know there's lots of animals around. The other thing that I thought was interesting, and we can talk about this more a little bit later, but I thought the political stuff was interesting. I thought the religious undertones of this were really interesting also, because right before they get into politics, Michelle Monaghan's character is talking about like Christianity. It's so like male dominant and like all this stuff. And she kind of is like breaking down like patriarchy and organized religion. And then a scene later or two, Chelsea's like, snakes are evil, read the Bible. And I was like, oh, okay, the Bible. All right, like let's get into that. So I am kind of curious about some of these other aspects of the theme that are being raised. And I think also it was doubling down in a lot of ways, and it's like images and symbols and plot points on the wellness stuff that we were highlighting earlier, with like now Jason Isaac's character Timothy is starting to take medication, and like they're getting into more of like, here, I'm gonna make you this protein shake, and here you're gonna do yoga, and all of those kind of motifs and ideas are being introduced even more heavily. So I think all that's really cool.
Totally. Yeah I want to talk about all that more too, because there's some fun things that are being teased, and I feel like this show does a good job of articulating both sides of arguments, like the politics, the religion and stuff, and so I do want to talk about that a little bit more. first, Brian, what are your thoughts on this episode?
Yeah, very, very similar. Felt like the show didn't move a whole lot. There is the sort of ensemble cast thing that can happen with the show where there's so many people that we only have so much time to check in with any group of people, right? I always think of like the soap opera thing where it's just like the two women are like standing across a room from each other, and like one of them 3 days ago said something like really, incendiary. And then now the other one is like finally responding to that line, and they have like 2 lines, and then we're like, anyway, we'll check in with them tomorrow. Right. It's just like, man, this is how soap operas work, because they're daily shows. Right. So they're literally like, let's make this scene take days. But so there is a little bit of that feeling, I think, with particularly this season, where it just feels like, yeah, we have one scene. Like we might have like a focal character or a focal group of characters who we'll spend a little bit of time with, but then we'll have other characters who we only get one scene with, or one little setup and one little payoff or something, right? So like Guy Talk or Belinda, or even the 3 friends, like they get this little, here, let's check in with them. We're going to have a meaningful moment with them, but then that's all you get. And now we have to wait another week to get anything more. But at the same time, the show, I just find the show very watchable, and it's just like I'm always happy with the way it looks. I'm always happy with the writing. I'm always happy with the casting and the performances and everything, that I'm just kind of like, I don't need every episode to move forward. And I think part of that is me. I just have to sort of adapt to this season, because I think when I think of this show, I think of like a propulsion. Alex, you said that it's building momentum, and I'm like, yeah, you're right. But I think of like a propulsive, like anxiety inducing, things are always kind of barreling forward. And that's probably not true of the first 2 seasons. It's just the way they feel in my memory, right? Is that they're always, I'm just thinking of like, of the Jake Ryan, is that his name? That the actor, and the hotel manager in the first season, right? Where it's just like, oh, what's going on with my room? Oh, well, is it my room ready? Like, what are we doing? It's just like, but it's like in that way that puts you just so on edge. This season is not trying to be that. This season is trying to be this slow, methodical kind of building toward things. So I'm curious to see where it goes, but I'm hoping, next episode being the middle of the season, by the end of that episode, I'm hoping we start to get some shoes dropping.
One thing that's puzzling to me, and you guys can speak into whether this is something that's new in this season or whether it's been a thing of the show all along, is there's not a lot of crossover between the groups. Like the
Right.
family is always with the family, the 3 friends are always with the 3 friends, and then Chelsea is always with Rick, and the staff are with the staff, and there's some little moments of crossover, but I was expecting more. Like when I think of a vacation mystery that's also an ensemble, part of the fun of an ensemble cast is clashing up the ensemble in unusual ways, right? And like partitioning them off into groups that they don't naturally fall into, and forcing conflict from people who don't know each other, or like, there's all of this tension and all of this drama that can be created when you're like mashing up people in the ensemble. And this season so far has done so little of that, where it's like Chelsea is talking to the model over there, and Rick really doesn't want to hang out with Gary/Greg. And there's that. And then Patrick Schwarzenegger, Saxon, started talking to Chloe also today, or I say today because I watched it today in this episode. And so I think those scenes are the ones where I'm like, oh, these characters are going to talk to each other now. Now I'm curious about this. But I like couldn't be less interested right now, at least, in Timothy's gonna like lie to his family about why he's so weird about everything right now. I'm not remotely interested in that, because I know what the dynamic is there. The dynamic has been established. I've got a handle on it. I don't think the needle is going to materially move in this scene, because I know that these characters don't have a lot of, I've seen the way that they interact. I've seen the weapons they use to like tactics that they use to like navigate stuff. And so I just am curious why the ensemble isn't like getting mixed up a little bit more.
It looks like that'll change next week based on the next week on stuff.
Ooh, okay.
Yeah, I was going to say that that's a really good observation, Trisha. I think that's part of what feels so lethargic about this season is that we're kind of watching them all. They're in their old worlds and they're kind of simmering there, and there are problems in their old worlds, but there's not much forward momentum because, as you say, they're stuck in these patterns that aren't evolving. But yeah, as Brian said, next episode looks to be kind of a capsule episode on this boat where everybody's going on the boat together. And so I think contained on a boat, all these groups now finally kind of forced to mix could be kind of a turning point for the season. I'm hoping that's the case.
Right. And we've had the two now pairs of characters who one has approached one and being like, hey, do I know you? And the other one's like, no, or I don't care, or whatever. And it's like, that's clearly like a little put a pin in this because that's going to turn into something later.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree that I think that is, you're pinpointing why some of the scenes feel almost like repeats, where I feel like particularly with the family, the Whitcliffs or whatever their names are.
Ratcliffs.
Ratliffs. Where like these, the Ratliffs, not the Ratcliffs or the Whitcliffs, they're the Ratliffs?
Ratliffs.
Ratliff.
There's no way of knowing.
Their dynamic in particular, I think, has felt the same. You kind of get the deal, and even kind of like Piper kind of does stuff this episode, but that doesn't quite move forward. Like
Piper made an appointment.
Right, she literally made an appointment.
That was her whole thing this episode.
It kind of felt to me like this was the final setup episode.
Right.
Where, like the pieces on the board are here, and it feels like there were more pieces this season than previous ones. I don't think that's actually true, but it kind of feels that way, maybe because of how disparate they are. But I think absolutely the next step is going to be exactly what you're talking about, Trisha, starting to send those people careening toward each other, because that's one of the most fun parts about the show once it gets going. Is like, you understand everybody's deal. The show's really good at like, I understand when this person is on screen, I know what you represent and what your deal is. And then it's suddenly like, oh man, those two deals are in a room now. What's going to happen is fun. And I think, and like what you guys are saying, seems like that's going to start happening pretty soon.
Yeah, it all brings me back to what we talked about last week, which is just the feeling that a show like this is constructed in that Netflix model of, it's kind of like you're reading a novel and you want to be able to like read the next chapter right away if you want to, because nothing much happened this chapter because we're taking our time and we're slowly building these characters. And this kind of being forced to wait a week and kind of having to remember what happened last episode. And it's just like, it doesn't feel like it's constructed for this like spaced out viewing. It feels like I want to just sit down and kind of like read this at my own pace. And that might mean watching the first 3 episodes very close to each other to kind of have that first act and not have these like interruptions that make it feel like it's really drawn out. So yeah, just continues to be interesting how, I think back to the old days and all the constraints around TV. And I think there just was more of this expectation that you sit down for an hour of TV and it's going to be a complete experience. It's not maybe it can still be a serial. It can still be a story that continues. But there's a little bit more of like this episode's going to have kind of its own plot that is self-contained within this episode that advances the larger plot. And yet this is a self-contained, satisfying experience. And I think these shows, like we're saying, it's like we have only time to check in with this character twice, and they might be very small, subtle scenes that kind of do a little bit of character work, and just that spaced out over like 8 weeks is a little bit exhausting. But then we have streaming, and so you can always just wait and binge them later, and then they exist forever in this bingeable form. So I understand why they're released this way. It does create a cultural conversation, as we are exemplifying right now, week over week. So it makes a lot of sense.
But I would say to that exact point, that's why I think a lot of times these shows, these weekly shows like a Severance or like a Game of Thrones or whatever, are expected to give you a little more to chew on every week,
right?
Because they're, you know, I have no idea when he outlined his first season if Mike White knew he was doing this for HBO or if it was gonna go to Netflix or Hulu and be dropped all at once or whatever. Now he knows. Now he knows this is a weekly episode, right? Or weekly show. So I think that, you know, the show should be whatever he thinks the show should be. That is not, I'm not saying the show needs to have more of a cliffhanger or more of like a gotcha thing. But I do think that is what we have come to expect as audiences, is that every week you're going to get something that you can't wait to go to the water cooler and you know, just be like, oh man, can you believe this thing happened, right? And I mean, maybe we get that with the snake a little bit, but as Trisha pointed out, it doesn't really do anything, you know?
Right.
So I think that definitely this kind of show, my monkey brain, appropriately enough for this season, is kind of going like, ooh, but where's my like hot goss that I get to talk about with my friends, right?
Yeah. Well, and I think, and this is why I appreciate having your perspective here, Trisha, as someone who hasn't seen the previous seasons, because I might be tempted to say, well, I'm also just kind of projecting what it felt like at the end of the other two seasons, where it did feel like each episode was like, oh, you got to talk about it. But yeah, if I'm really thinking about the early season or the early episodes, there is a lot of exposition set up. And so it's maybe just coming off the high of the cliffhanger couple like finale episodes that makes you forget that there's this kind of setup period that has to happen as well.
Yeah. Once again, season 1, I didn't get into. Like, I watched the first episode and I was like, not hooked. But then, by the end of season 2, it's just like, that was so amazing. Yeah, any memory of early episodes in the season being lackluster was wiped away by just how much I loved the finale and how it all ended up.
Mm-hmm. I'm not asking to be told, but I will say this episode seems to me to solidify that this is not a true anthology series. Like,
yes,
Belinda walks up to that guy and she's like, "Hi, I know you from the other show.
Hi, we're the recurring characters."
Hello. And like, then you have the backstory where Chloe is telling that like his ex-girlfriend was crazy. His ex-wife was crazy. She walked into the sea. They only found her leg. I don't know if that's true or not. That could be a totally made up story that Chloe like got wrong or that Gary Gregg like lied to her about. Who knows? But I think that it's interesting that you guys know, like, you know that information. You know how accurate it is or not accurate it is. And so like what Gary Gregg is hiding is not being hidden from most people who are watching the show. It's currently being hidden from me. I don't know what his whole deal is, but most people who have seen this show before know exactly what his whole deal is. And so they're making a mystery out of a thing that's not really a mystery.
No,
Don't tell her though.
Well, no, what I'll say is
like, this is part of the experiment. But sorry, continue.
Okay, well, I will say we are lacking information.
Okay, you are also lacking information.
We don't know 100% about
interesting.
like what happened since last season with this guy and
there were some mysteries left.
Oh, because the timeline, this isn't like immediately after the last season or something. There's been some missing time.
Yeah, it's kind of, maybe they have said. I'm sure they have said it's in some way how long it's been, but I don't have that.
Yeah, I don't think it's like the next week. Yeah, it's like it's been some time.
Yeah.
I mean, I assume from the Trump conversation that this season is meant to be taking place in present day. I guess it could have been 4 years ago or 8 years ago. But I'm kind of assuming every season is taking place roughly around the time that it comes out, which means there's roughly a year in between seasons. But I have no idea if that's actually true.
Yeah. Yeah, well, and I think, again, I'm going to continue to ask that we experiment on you, Trisha, because I think this is, like, the most, so far, the show has kind of tipped its hat about, like, we're definitely connecting things. Maybe not the most, but, like, the most it's made a meal of, hey, we were in a show together before, and that is the mystery, as opposed to simply a recurring character that is continuing an arc or, you know, starting a different arc or something like that.
Yeah, I didn't need to watch season 1 to fully like love season 2, and there was no like it was fun to go back and watch season 1 and see the origin of a couple characters, but their story made perfect sense in season 2 on its own for me.
Yeah, and I want to see if that is true for season 3 as well.
Right.
I assume it's really interesting strategy because, conventional screenwriting and TV wisdom, TV less so for its own reasons, but dictates that you never have characters talk about something that happened that we saw, right? Because it's just like, oh no, we saw that scene. You don't need to talk about it. Whatever. Unless it's
unless the content of that scene is interesting in some way.
Right. Or if it's a reveal, right? Like that character finding out about what happened is itself going to be a plot point, right? And TV is not always like that because they can't, especially back in the day on network TV and a weekly show, especially in a drama, you couldn't necessarily count on somebody having seen it. So that's why they started doing like last episode, or they would refer to it. I do think in this episode, having Belinda tell the story of, well, my boss died and or somebody died, and then she ran off with that Gary Gregg guy, the first guy she met. I thought I saw him. I'm going to assume that was something that you all saw in a previous season. That, I have no reason to believe that Belinda is lying about that. And so that's really I wonder if they really are I can't tell if this is a real anthology. You're having Belinda explain it like I haven't seen it, which was handy for me because I haven't. But presumably you all have, and I don't. It seems like that would be a boring conversation.
This is all gets into interesting political territory, not in American politics, but in award season politics. Because I'm pretty sure this show, it wants to compete in whatever category is most, competitive for it. And so I feel like there's been some vacillation between whether they're continuing to identify as a true limited series, or it's are they just a series now? Because a limited series is you're not planning to do infinite seasons. You are telling a discrete story over 6 episodes as a limited series in kind of the old world playbook. But now a lot of prestige TV is limited series, but then they're really popular and successful, so they're not really limited anymore, and they become series. Mm-hmm. So yeah, we're in this weird moment of the classifications are getting blurred because these limited series are the big hits and therefore need to continue.
Well, at the Emmys, season 1 was in the category of limited/anthology. Season 2 was in the category of drama series. So they literally said we are no longer classifying ourselves as an anthology series, which I think this show, it never really broadly said that's what it was going to be. It's just, hey, we're going to have a different cast every time. That doesn't mean it can't be set in the same universe. That doesn't mean there can't be recurring characters, et cetera, et cetera. But I am realizing the more we talk about it that every anthology show is can't just be itself. Every Fargo and True Detective and American Horror Story, they're all. It's the longer you go, the more you have to be what if this character showed up and that says that all of these seasons happen in the same universe, what does that mean, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Night Country.
Yeah. Just to quickly go back to that scene though, where Belinda's telling, this is what happened in the past. I think it is smart how the show does it because I forget, Alex or Brian, if you said it, but we don't know how much she knows. We know what we know, but we don't necessarily know what all the other characters know about what happened because of the perspective of it. And so there is still mystery there. If you know what actually happened, what do people think happened? Or how do they talk about what they happened? And are they telling the truth just for character reasons or out of respect or whatever it is? And so I think that show, or the way the show does that, is smart. And that's what I continue to love about this show, is that it is smart. And just the last thing I want to say about the political conversation with the 3 friends that, you voted for Trump and how that's a big turn. I feel like the way that that's handled is just so, it's what I love about this show, is that it can somehow kind of transcend your individual perspective or politics and be able to identify the bigger thing that is happening, which is these 2 are now othering this other person. And that, as you were saying, Alex, is almost like a a higher tier crime than what was happening before, and like look at these tribes like forming out of what was love. Anyway, I just love that you can take something as that everyone's going to have an opinion about and still execute it in a way that lets you appreciate the meta aspect, or at least for me, that's how it worked. And I thought it was really well done.
In some ways, the fact that there's this symmetry with the first 3 episodes. We get all arrangements of the 3 friends talking behind each other's backs. Kind of supports the theory that like the first 3 episodes of the season are just kind of laying the foundation. We've now set up all of the different angles on this triad, and now maybe it's time to start breaking stuff.
And what's going to happen? Like I truly don't know now what's going to happen next with them, and that is kind of the fun part of knowing that there is so much more now that we have this setup.
And Leslie Bibb's character was the only one of the 3 where I'm like, I don't really quite know who she is yet, you know? And then like we only got a little bit of time with them this time, but it was like, here's who she is. Like, okay, gotcha. Loud and clear.
Yeah. Cool. Well, yeah. So like I said, maybe not a ton of stuff happening, but stuff still happening. I'm still enjoying it, how it's being handled. And it seems like maybe in the next episode Hide or Seek, things might start breaking. Shoes may drop, as Brian said.
Yeah. Dominoes may topple.
Indeed. Yeah, so we'll end it there. If you enjoy this format, if you like our What We're Watching series and you want to see us talk about shows week by week, let us know by joining the Beyond the Screenplay Patreon, where our What We're Watching tier gets all these episodes as soon as they're ready, and you get access to all of the questionable shows that we've done series on in the past, like Boba Fett and True Detective Night Country and
Foundation.
How could I forget?
Remember?
Yeah.
Foundation.
Do you remember it?
Many lessons learned
Yeah.
from
We
all
Learn
these
a
shows.
lot.
They were fun. They were fun conversations for sure. So all those are over on the Beyond the Screenplay Patreon. Thank you everyone for listening, and we will see you in the next episode for episode 4, Hide or Seek.
Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Bye.